song that they play when I
Tough to follow that one. Hi, I'm Christopher Guith, the Senior Vice President at the Chamber's Global Energy Institute, and I'm very pleased to welcome our next guest, Congressman Scott Peters. He represents California's 50th Congressional District, one of the most picturesque in the country, I'll add, as a fellow Southern Californian. First elected in 2012, he sits on the House Budget, Energy and Commerce, and Joint Economic Committee, and has become one of the biggest problem solvers in Congress. Congressman Peters has also established himself as a leader on permitting reform. And for that reason and many others, I am very pleased to welcome him this morning for remarks and then join me for a chat. Congressman Peters.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. This country prides itself on accomplishing big things together, whether it's winning world wars, constructing an interstate highway system, or discovering the next medical breakthrough. One of our greatest challenges this century is combating the climate crisis. Last month, climate scientists issued the starkest warning yet. The world must cut emissions by 60% by 2035 to limit the planet's rise in temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Last year, Congress provided record funding to build a cleaner, more secure energy system through historic legislation, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And in this Congress, we need to work on speed. We can have all the money in the world, but we will still fail if we don't act faster. Our country has mobilized quickly before. During World War II, San Diego war factories built a bomber an hour to help combat fascism and support our allies. To combat COVID-19, we developed a vaccine in 1 year, when 10 to 15 years is the norm. And today we're debating whether a decade is an appropriate amount of time to construct a single transmission line, offshore wind facility, or geothermal plant. Put simply, it is procedurally impossible to hit our climate goals under our current system. Look at high voltage electric transmission lines. According to research from Princeton University, 80% of the projected emissions reductions from the Inflation Reduction Act depend on building transmission faster. Berkeley Lab found that there's currently enough wind, solar, and storage projects in the pipeline to power nearly 85% of the economy, but 80% of them could be canceled due to insufficient transmission. The current power grid took 150 years to build. To get to net zero emissions by 2050, we have to triple its size in the next 30 years. That means 200,000 miles of new transmission lines by the 2030s. Over the last decade, we built just 1,800 miles a year because each one takes more than 10 years to complete. 7 of those 10 years are for planning and permitting. Last week, the Department of Interior gave the Trans-West Express Transmission Project, which will transport electricity from Wyoming to Nevada, notice to proceed to start construction. Now, this is a positive development, right? But the project was initiated in 2005. It took 18 years to get the approvals to start construction, and 2/3 of the project will be built on federal land. We have to go faster, and we know it can be done because other countries are doing it. North America has built just 7 gigawatts of interregional transmission since 2014, and less than half of that's in the United States. So say, give us credit for 3 or 4. South America has built 22, Europe 44, and China 260 gigawatts of international transmission. Now, permitting in the United States is an issue across all clean energy technologies. A new report found that permitting timelines have doubled since the 1970s, and nearly half of all clean energy projects are delayed in the permitting process compared to just 15% for fossil fuels. And many of the clean energy projects are supported in the Inflation Reduction Act, whether it's offshore wind or geothermal or interstate transmission lines, won't come online until after 2030. So we likely must deploy solar and wind 5 to 6 times our historical pace to reach 80% clean power by 2030. It's a big job, and those of us who are committed to climate action, who say it's the greatest threat we face, are called to rethink the cumbersome requirements that are decelerating clean energy projects. In the 1970s, our priority was to stop bad things from happening. That was our environmental priority, stop destructive, dirty projects. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, was designed to require public input to ensure federal agencies assess the environmental impacts of proposing federal projects and their alternatives before making decisions. And we have NEPA to thank for a great deal of environmental preservation, but its implementation is inevitably and almost by design slow, with documents that are thousands of pages long, reviews that can take more than 4 years to complete. And NEPA is also the most litigated environmental statute. Lawsuits can drag on projects for more than a decade, and the simple threat of litigation can prevent new projects, meaning that including the climate action projects we have to build to meet our climate goals. To replace polluting fossil fuel plants, build the efficient cities of the future, and transition to zero energy transportation system, we can't just stop bad projects, we have to build good ones. And every day the interstate transmission line doesn't get built to deliver cheap, clean, renewable, reliable power is another day the ancient polluting coal plant is harming environmental justice communities. Every day we delay replacing diesel trucks and gas cars with clean energy or hydrogen, dirty vehicles continue to pump climate pollution into the atmosphere, threatening frontline communities and endangered species. Ironically, many laws intended 50 years ago to protect the environment will undermine our environmental protection efforts today. Some claim that NEPA and other environmental laws aren't the problem or that they can't be touched, but that approach simply isn't compatible with science or the time we have left to maintain a stable climate. And fixing laws to serve the public good is our job as representatives. We can achieve high environmental standards with less time. As chair of the New Democrats Coalition Climate Change and Clean Energy Task Force, I'm working with Republicans and Democrats in both chambers to find common ground and advance bipartisan permitting reform legislation. But this is not a problem Washington can solve on its own. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Permit America to Build campaign will play a key role in helping to modernize our permitting process at the state, federal, and local level. I love the maze I just went through. We should put that out in the Capitol building. I think that I was saying the Rayburn foyer would be a great place for that. Because whether it's broadband, renewable energy, transmission, roads, bridges, public transport, or housing, you all have the experience navigating the system to build quality, environmentally sound infrastructure. We'll need your help in identifying the roadblocks in our system today and your ideas on how we can build infrastructure faster without sacrificing environmental integrity. For example, we can reduce the level of review for climate projects on non-sensitive land while ensuring polluting projects remain heavily scrutinized. There's no reason a solar project on degraded land miles away from people should go through the same process as a polluting project in a local community, which is why I'm teaming up with academics and thought leaders to find a legislative fix. We can tweak our judicial review processes to protect vulnerable communities while preventing wealthy NIMBYs and bad actors from blocking essential clean energy projects, and we can give interstate transmission lines and geothermal projects the same favorable treatment as oil and gas and ensure the federal government has the authority to build a reliable environmental grid. Some of my colleagues have already introduced some legislation to deal with this part by part. Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois introduced the SITE Act to establish new federal siting authority at FERC for specific interregional transmission projects. Congresswoman McCaster of Florida introduced legislation to reform our outdated interconnection queue processes so new clean energy projects can connect to the grid faster. Congressman Horsford and Congressman Lee of Nevada introduced a bill to provide an investment tax credit of 30% for regionally significant transmission projects. I'm working with Senator Hickenlooper on a bill to establish minimum levels of transmission capabilities between regions. We should also update our laws to require more opportunities for meaningful and early community engagement, which is the right thing to do and leads to better project outcomes. Republicans have introduced some promising ideas in H.R. 1, like creating a better process for determining the level of review to apply to a project, reusing existing data instead of reinventing the wheel at each step, and creating presumptive timelines for review so that projects are not indefinitely stalled. The moment is ripe for bipartisan compromise, and we'll need your help to advance those reforms. So please share your ideas, reach out to Republicans and Democrats to advocate for comprehensive permitting reform, which I know you're doing. And for my Republican colleagues, We'll look beyond just oil and gas to invest in an all-above energy strategy. And for our Democratic colleagues, we'll have to understand the realities of energy on the ground and that things don't change overnight. H.R. 1 has some really helpful ideas that I think we can work with. Whether you care about public transportation, chips manufacturing facilities, hydrogen hubs, or offshore wind, our current permitting system is slowing deployment and should be modernized. Finally, we have to grow our coalitions of support for permitting reform. Our task will affect everyone from developers to workers to local communities. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to working on these questions. I'm making this my mission in this term. In a divided government, I think this is the kind of thing we can work on together and come up with something that works for everyone and for the country. And I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much for, I think, objectively thoughtful remarks. You hit upon bipartisanship, and there's the old adage that politics makes strange bedfellows. So how does a former environmental attorney, Democratic member of Congress from San Diego become a collaborator with a former engineer, Republican chairman of the Natural Resources Committee from Little Rock, Arkansas? It seems like very strange bedfellows on its face, but we hear very optimistic news about your collaboration.
With Bruce Westerman. Yeah, so by the way, I did this work in my pre-politics life. I actually tried to cite landfills as part of my environmental practice. And I always thought that, you know, I have this phrase I tell my staff, no is the second best answer. You know, yes is great, but don't string me out. And I learned about that. It became very frustrated. And I always thought we could get better results in a faster time, and that people didn't understand the cost of money and delay and how that inhibits investment. So I've always been ripe for this kind of discussion. Bruce Westerman, I met him on a trip we took to the Middle East, and he explained to me about sequoias and wildfires. And he's the only member of Congress with a graduate degree from the Yale School of Forestry. He says he was the only conservative at the Yale School of Forestry. I probably believe that, right? But he's helping me, and he's helping Kevin McCarthy with the sequoias, and he's got a lot of insights on how forestry management can be improved in California, to say the least. That's an expertise that we can use. That's, I think, how you solve problems. I think, and he's a sincere guy who wants to solve these issues and make things better. We're going to work together, and I'm lucky to call him a collaborator and a friend.
So where do you think that collaboration is going right now, if you had the crystal ball, as far as getting to 60 votes?
I think there's a real frustration across the economy and the delay and how long it takes stuff to get done. Whether you're, and boy, I'm in California, so we have CEQA, which is another thing that gets in the way of building housing and not just energy, but in a lot of things. And I think that what we'll do is we're going to look particularly at the Builder Act. That's Garrett Graves' effort, and start there. Like, what are the things we should expect out of the government in terms of timelines? I think we'll look at transmission inside of FERC. What has to happen sort of from the regulatory side. There's an argument that we've given $1 billion to fund the agencies, and that will solve the problem. I don't believe that's true, but let's take advantage of that. Let's make sure we implement this right. And then I really think, my own personal effort is to look at NEPA, which is, again, a law that I practice with, because it's kind of, I think it's just really not achieving the goals it says that it wants to achieve. We talk about public input as the reason to keep NEPA, but almost all the comments are from corporations and big players who can afford lawyers. And if 52 years after NEPA, we're still complaining about the effect of pollution on underserved communities, maybe NEPA didn't do the job. Maybe there's something we can do. Maybe we can make it more effective. I think it's time to have that conversation when there's so much money out there to do clean energy. And whether you're a climate activist or just a taxpayer, we don't want to see that money wasted on process.
3 weeks ago, we formed a coalition and sent a letter to Congress signed by 350 different groups across the country, across the economy. So in our final time here, and with a captive audience, how can the business community and our allies in labor help you get this across the finish line?
I would just make sure that you're talking, that you're having your businesses talking to their representatives to understand the importance of this. You know, there's all sorts of irrationality that people don't understand. And you guys think of yourself as educators. So there's 435 members of Congress. None of them has your specific experience, probably. I mean, I could talk to you about Subtitle D landfill liners, peer-to-peer. But, you know, on building a transmission line or whatever it is you're trying to do, that's something you understand. That's something you understand that the government might be getting in the way of, that might be affecting the area that a particular representative or senator represents. So be an educator about that, one. And two, develop a really good relationship with the staff. You know, I have a 20-minute meeting with you, but it's the staff member who's taking notes, who will be following up, who will be telling me 3 months later when the vote happens, remember you talked to that company here. So make sure that you develop and sustain and maintain a relationship over time with the staff. And just educate them. That's I think the best thing you can do, because it's the facts that will overcome the ideology. But if they don't have the facts, it's pretty tough to buck the extremes on both sides. So I really welcome the Chamber's effort. I think it's great. I think you're right on. I love the maze, like I said. I got a couple pictures in there. I'm really optimistic we're going to make some big progress in this term.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thanks so
Congressman
much.
Peters.
Thank you. Thanks.